This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with your host, Vicki Davis.
Thank you, Advancement Courses, for sponsoring today's show. Stay tuned at the end of the show for a special discount to save 15% on engaging in meaningful online professional development. And I'll also share my personal experience when I took a course through Advancement Courses last year. Today, we're talking with Rachelle Dene Poth. We've had her on this show before, and she is awesome. And Rachelle, you have a new book for world language teachers. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so thank you for having me on again. First of all, it's always good to talk to you. And I'm really excited about this book because it is the first book that I've written specifically for world language teachers, which I've been teaching Spanish for a really long time. And it's called Your World Language Classroom. And it's a mix of strategies for in-person and digital instruction, because I actually wrote it all of last year and the start of, this past school year, and just trying to think of what can we do as world language educators when we might be shifting between environments, or even if we're not, just to open up a lot of more opportunities for our students. So it was fun to write, challenging a little bit, just to think, of different ideas that I could try with my students and then to include that into the book. So I enjoyed it.
Rachelle, we're going to talk about 5 wonderful tips for world language teachers. And I'm sure some of these will be in the book as well, but you have a lot more tips than this. So what's your first?
My first, and this is something I've said I wish I knew years ago, was the importance of starting the year with building relationships. And I would always dive right into we got to start learning, the language and everything. But over the last probably 10 years, I've really focused on building those relationships and how essential that is for us as teachers to get to know our students. And then more importantly, too, for students to get to know one another and to feel comfortable, because learning a language, you don't want to speak in front of everybody else. You're afraid to make mistakes. And I found, and this is for adults too, that the more that we feel comfortable in our environment, the better it is. And so I've focused more on doing some different icebreakers, using just no tech or just using some technology if we haven't been in person, to just get the kids to know each other and for them to get to know the real me as a teacher, and just to form that relationship between us.
As my listeners know, that I always say you have to relate to educate. So that's where we start. Could you give us one of your icebreakers?
Yeah, so this year I did something a little bit differently. I did some questions, but some I used like a Google form, and I put some would you rather questions. I put some open-ended responses, things that I would be interested in and that I could share with students, if you could go anywhere, where would it be? Or what's something that you're worried about learning a language, for example. So there was a nice mix, so I could get to know them, but I could also use it to address some of the concerns that they might all have without them knowing who actually said what those concerns were. So it definitely helped for a couple of days. And it was a lot of fun to do those questions too, because I jumped in and answered as well.
Fun. Okay. What's your second?
Okay. So my second one is, because you always have to have a backup plan, you need to have ideas that are either no tech or low tech, or that involve a lot of tech, because as we've seen, especially in this past year and a half now plus, we need to have a lot of different ideas. So having something that you use in class, I would use a lot of station rotations and hands-on materials, which was difficult to do in a virtual environment. So then I had to think of, well, how do I do that? So then using some of those digital spaces, breakout rooms, collaborative boards where students can still feel connected, but they have an opportunity to do a lot of different activities. If you have that digital space and it doesn't work, what are some other options? And then of course, something in between. So that's always my low tech, no tech, high tech, to create more opportunities for our students.
That's great to have each of those in your toolkit, because sometimes you never know. You may have a day and you end up with a lot of kids in quarantine and you have to kind of punt and change that lesson a little bit. So that's awesome. Okay. So what's your third tip?
Okay, third tip is, and especially for language educators, helping students, because for years I thought I just have to teach them Spanish, but I realized that they're not all going to go on to be Spanish educators. I need to help them to build their essential skills. And that comes down to learning to communicate in Spanish, but just in general, and setting up ways for them to write and to interact and to speak and to become comfortable with speaking in front of others. So using in-class space to have them work together and build comfort and confidence, but then also having those digital tools that we know, like a Flipgrid, where if we're not together, I can talk to them, I can give them feedback, and they can figure out how to interact with one another in those digital spaces. And, there's so many benefits for that beyond the language, of course, social emotional learning skills too.
Well, and it's about conversation and relation, and, being able to communicate with people in another language is very important. Okay. What's your fourth?
do something totally different. Like just break away from, I'll give you an example. For years, I was just teaching the Spanish, and I also teach a STEAM course, and we do augmented reality and virtual reality. And my Spanish students kept seeing these cool projects and said, why can't we do this? And I said, because I'm teaching you Spanish. And so ever since they pushed me a little bit, it led me to kind of break my tradition and try things that were not necessarily in that Spanish teaching zone. So I encourage people to bring in the augmented virtual reality because those are great options. But even for some people used to standing in front and talking, like use stations, which I had no idea what I was doing, but just figure out something you're doing and how could you kind of mix it up a little bit. It might be messy and chaotic, but it's totally worth it.
So how are you using AR and VR in Spanish?
Well, the first way was actually I used co-spaces at the end of the year, and the students worked together on groups and they were narrating about their childhood. They could collaborate in that same project together, use their VR, like the headsets or their phones to kind of explore not just theirs, but the other classmates. And it really, they remembered it so much more because it was like they were picking the objects and they were being really intentional about the conversations and then also just collaborating with their peers. So I was nervous about it at first, but it went so well that it's something that I've continued to do every year.
Oh, that's awesome. And what's your fifth?
Getting out of the way and letting students lead more, giving them the chance. And I started to do this years ago with students at a technology showcase. I took about 10 students to a local technology showcase in Pittsburgh, and they just presented about tools we were using in Spanish and why they liked them, what it helped them to do better, and shared their projects. And over the years, we kind of leveled up and went to the state level. And eventually, I wasn't introducing them. They were presenting, and then they were actually presenting to our students in our school, our teachers. And so whenever we give the students a chance to get out, like we get out of the way and they get up in front, it really helps them to build that confidence, not just in our classroom, but that carries with them moving forward. And again, things that I wish I knew years ago. And as language teachers, there's so many ways for us to do that, like using stations or just even helping them to work with a peer, whether in person, we can do it virtually too. There's a lot of options, but giving them that chance to kind of build their leadership skills is, in addition to learning Spanish, it's something that we can do in our classrooms.
So these are our 5 wonderful tips, but let me ask you a question. And I deal with this in technology, and I'm sure you deal with this also as you teach a world language. What do you do with the students who walk in your classroom with an anxiety and say, I can't learn Spanish? And I have some that walk in and say, technology doesn't like me. So that's the technology version. How do you get them past their anxiety so they can start learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. One is I share my own experiences about how I struggled with some of my classes. The other piece is just really making time to talk to them. I had a student even recently where just said, I can't do this. I can't write in Spanish. Can I use a translator? And I said, no, you don't need to. Just chunks, just piece by piece. If you make mistakes, that's okay. It's going to be fine. And then in other cases, some students who don't necessarily want to speak up in front of class, using tools like that enable you to record a message. And sometimes they're fine with that. It helps them to feel like I made this. If I made a mistake, I could go back and do it. And then once it's their end product, they're fine with it being shown in the classroom. And that just helps them to build their confidence and, just work with them one-on-one. But that's why I think I know those relationships are so essential so that they feel comfortable expressing that. And they also have that support in the classroom, not just from us, but from their peers.
Well, and even having video, I've seen our Spanish teacher allow students to create a video, and students would really, really practice and do so much better than if they were put on the spot and had one chance, once and done. So giving multiple options is such a great idea.
Yeah, it's something I hear all the time. I can't do this. I won't be good at it. And it's just, I say one day at a time, one thing at a time. It's okay. I'm here to help you. No worries. We've all been through it.
So last question, what do you say to the people who say, okay, so we've got Google Lens, we've got all these translation services that are coming that are either here or on the way. Why do students still need to learn a language? What's your answer?
Because technology may not always work. It might not always be around, the one that you're used to using. And it really is applicable to so many areas of life that you don't realize. Even as an adult, there are words that I come across when I'm reading in English that I can understand because I have the French and Spanish. And if people would have told me in high school, you're going to be a Spanish teacher, I would have laughed because I was taking French. I mean, who knew? You just don't know later on where it's going to come in handy. And you need to have those skills and not rely on the other. It's nice to have those as something, when you need an answer, you really need to rely on and trust yourself and your own capabilities when it comes to learning a language.
Thank you so much, Rachelle. It's Rachelle Dene Poth, and the book is Your World Language Classroom. Pick it up. Last year, when I needed to take a college CEU course, I chose advancement courses and learned so much about teaching computer science in the classroom. I recently wrote about this on my blog called 7 Reasons Advancement Courses Has Excellent Teacher Professional Development. Check it out at coolcatteacher.com/PD and use the code COOL15, that's COOL15, to receive 15% off your advancement courses purchase. Thank you, Advancement Courses, for awesome PD and for sponsoring today's episode.
You've been listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. If you like this program, you can find more at coolcatteacher.com. If you wish to see more content by Vicki Davis, you can find her on Facebook and Twitter under Cool Cat Teacher. Thank you for listening.